Tara Goodwin started her career as an IT professional, working first for a large pharmaceutical company in the US and then in the UK, then moving on to IT consulting and eventually sales. Today, she is a certified meditation teacher who offers group and private lessons on meditation. She works extensively with clients through individual and group coaching programs and is host of the podcast, The Meditation Conversation. Welcome, Kara.
Thank
What
you
an
so much.
interesting journey from a very technical world to becoming a meditation teacher. Tell us a bit about how this all started.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. Yeah, it was a bit of a winding path for me because when I was immersed in the IT world, I was living a very practical life. I have a husband and two children. I have animals, dogs and cats. And so it was all I could do to keep up with the demands of motherhood and domestic life. And of course, my job, my career. Um, I had always been interested in spirituality kind of from a distance. Like I felt like um, I was always very drawn to it and very interested in it, but it was never really even a cornerstone of my life. It was just something that like I might pick up a book from time to time that sort of reminded me that there was more happening than the grind. But really, I was so deeply entrenched in my physical world and my material world. Unfortunately, the way that I did find that connection was through tragedy. It was really through my life kind of blowing up. Um, my Before my life blew up, I actually let go of my career because we made a family move to Italy. So we packed up our kids and my husband got a European role we were living in America. And so in order to do that, I left my job. And I recognized at the time, even though that was a difficult decision, it was also a relief for me because I was feeling like I was not doing anything well. And I wasn't really living my purpose, even though I didn't really speak that kind of language. And I don't think that I felt like I was capable of doing more and living like a regular corporate life. But it definitely wasn't like fulfilling. It was really just more of a practical kind of something I felt like I needed to do. So when we had this opportunity to move, it really felt like, okay, now maybe I can, grow in a different way. But we lived in Italy for about 2 years and I really didn't work myself so much, even though I didn't have the career pulling me in different directions. I really wasn't kind of figuring out who I was or anything. And so in hindsight, I feel like the universe sort of gave me a huge wake up call. And it didn't feel like that at the time. At the time, it really felt very ungrounding. It felt like a huge earthquake was just happening all in 1 year, starting in May of that year. Sister-in-law took her life. And then 3 weeks later, my dog died. And then few weeks after that, my stepdad, during this time, my stepdad was having some health issues that we didn't know what was happening. So he ended up having a really delicate surgery on his brain stem. So we didn't know if he'd even be able to walk or talk after that. Luckily, it turned out okay, but that was a very, very dicey time. Very shortly after that, my mother-in-law was hit by a motorbike when she crossed the road, just grieving the loss of her daughter. And then she ends up in the hospital with this major accident. And then by Thanksgiving of that year, which is in November, my stepmom was in the ICU, the intensive care unit, and ended up having a heart transplant. in that year. So from May to November, we were just getting hit. All these people that we just loved with all our hearts were passing away or having something very, very serious and life-threatening happening to them. And it was like over and over and over, this was playing out. You know, I'd answer the phone and it'd be like, something tragic has happened. You know, I don't know how to tell you this, that type of thing.
Wow. So
Yeah,
this is, it really throws some people completely out of their anchor, their foundations. In your case, it was different. Something happened.
yeah, yeah. And it wasn't like immediately I knew I needed meditation, but it just I really could feel that something was happening and I didn't understand what it was, and I needed something. And meditation, I'd always been drawn to meditation, but I had tried a few times on my own. Like, I'll just sit here and I will be still and I'll close my eyes, and then magical things are going to happen. I'm going to be really calm and all my stress is going to melt away. And I had no idea what I was doing. You know, like, we think we need to do something, but we think something amazing is going to happen. And of course, like, now I understand that meditation is like a cumulative thing. And you may have some really beautiful, like, you may feel a shift within you into calmness, and deep peace. But really that shift into a calmer state or a higher version of yourself, that takes dedication, and it's a cumulative effect. But I had this expectation that I could sit down, and if I just gave myself, you know, a few minutes in meditation, I feel something amazing. It wasn't happening that way, and I didn't know what I was doing. So, you know, time after time, I'd try this meditation thing and wouldn't get anywhere, and I'd stop, you know, and I wouldn't do it again. When all of this was happening and the walls were coming down around my life, I really felt like, okay, I need to find a teacher, because I think there's something here with meditation, but I don't know how to, I don't have the key right now to unlock it within myself. So there were a series of synchronicities, a series of like little ways that the universe, like, once I put the intention out there, and I kind of even said an inward prayer, even though I really didn't feel very connected to God at that time. It was sort of a Hail Mary, like, you know, okay, I think I want to learn how to meditate, but I know something's missing. Send me a teacher. If you exist, send me, get me pointed on the path. And there were a series of very succinct synchronicities that happened pretty quickly from that, where it was like, okay, this documentary showed up in my life that was all about Paramhansa Yogananda, who brought meditation to America. It really, really resonated with me. He had a methodical way of teaching meditation. I felt really drawn to his methods. I was able to, from there, find an organization that was teaching his methods and get a really stable practice. And then that was how I developed a practice, was really through having somebody who was guiding me and having a methodology, so that I knew, like, it's more than just sitting there and being like, all right, when's the magic gonna kick in?
Yeah, but you went through a process. You immersed yourself first into meditation, and then it was like the universe almost conspired and provided those teachers that you needed at that time to bring you forward.
Absolutely. I love that conspiratorial, like, like, yes. And it took in my case, you know, it took the demand on my side to be like, okay, it's time. I'm in. Let's do this. You know, I see that going in when I look back in hindsight, even though, again, at the time it felt like what the heck? I'm just gonna, okay, God, you know, hook me up. And it was kind of like with one eye, like, let's see what's going to happen, kind of a, not a totally like, yes, I totally have faith that this is going to happen. It was much more like, uh, let's give it a shot.
Well, we just had a World Meditation Day a couple of days ago, and we talked about it earlier on, just before we started this conversation, that there's obviously a big spiritual need, not in institutional religion, but in a type of experiential spirituality. A lot of people have difficulty meditating. They say, "Oh, I can't sit. I have all these thoughts in my head. I can't sit that long. I tried it for a few days. I just can't do it." What would you tell these people?
Well, again, for me, a really important part was to get a teacher, get methods so that it was more than just trying to sit there and figure it out. So like in my meditation, for example, I have, a relaxation phase. I have, where we incorporate, and the breath has a big part of being in more energy and shifting physiologically within the central nervous system so that I have more peace, so that I have more calmness, because we can use the breath to induce a greater sense of calmness. For me also, I like to teach with a mantra, which can help to focus the mind so that you're not just sitting there going, I keep thinking, here I am thinking again, and it's like, your thoughts are going to come up, especially in the beginning. Accepting that is part of it, not trying to push away and judge ourselves for having thoughts that come in. It's just like if you want to play piano, it's bit by bit, you keep building and you keep building. So having any sort of expectation that you're not going to think when you sit down to meditate is not realistic expectation. It's a training, and it's a practice. But having something like a mantra can help us to redirect our thoughts, like, oh, I'm on the thought train. Wait, let me come back. And we can use a mantra that gives our brain something to sort of do, but it's using like ancient sounds that have an energetic effect on us and can help us to open up our pathways. And so those are a few of the things I recommend. And
I just want to touch on that last
Yeah.
point on meditation changing the brain. Can you go into that a bit?
Yes. Yeah. Meditation changes your brain in a lot of different ways, depending on how you use meditation. But from a general perspective, and really kind of very simplified, but we have the front of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, or you may hear like prefrontal lobes, but this sort of front part of our brain right behind the forehead it's the most evolved part of our brain. And as such, it's the youngest part of our brain. It's kind of like, as humans have developed, this part has been the newer part that's come in, but it's where we experience unity and joy and creativity, and these higher human functions all happen with the prefrontal cortex. And then we have another part of the brain that's like the lower middle part of the brain called the limbic system. And this is where our fear and our anger and that kind of knee-jerk instinctual, like, any of those lower things happen with a triggering of the limbic system. So a lot of us are living in the limbic system. It's our default mode. We get cut off in traffic, and that's the part of the brain that steps in. Well, with meditation, we can actively focus at the prefrontal cortex. And for me, when I teach, it's like focus on the point between your eyebrows, which also happens to be the third eye. So there's like but it also is bringing your awareness and your energy to the front of the brain, which is that prefrontal cortex side. So any place that we focus on or we bring awareness to, that is what we're strengthening. And this is true of, the law of attraction. If you're focusing on lack, for example, I don't have enough of something, or my relationship isn't working, and we're bringing a lot of focus to this part that we don't like, we're drawing attention to that and we're strengthening it. Funnily enough, even though we think we don't want it, by that focusing on it, it's drawing it back to us. So in the similar way, just from an energetic flow, any place that we focus on in our brain is going to stronger, and it's going to be our default.
Yeah, it's really, if you explain it, a journey from instinctual reaction toward awareness to being conscious of what you're doing. And what we're seeing in the world today is such a lot of fear and anxiety.
Yes.
Which is overwhelming and seemingly distracting so many people from their spiritual path.
Absolutely. And a lot of that is that strong limbic system that a lot of people are just living in it. Fear is huge for keeping us locked into our limbic system, because that is, the more we're in fear, the more we're just naturally in that lower part of the brain. So when we can disconnect from fear, disconnect from worry, then we can bring awareness higher up in the brain. Likewise, through meditation, we can choose to just be aware of that part of our brain, and then it will strengthen it, which means that even outside of meditation, that will be the stronger part of our brain that will start to become our default, so that we're not living in the limbic system. We're not pulled around through life because of the limbic system. It's having more awareness, having more pause in between a trigger and a reaction, so that we can make a higher choice in how we respond to things, more, responding to life rather than reacting to it all the time.
You hold a lot of workshops and retreats. Where do you hold such retreats? Is it in nature, in a obviously very nice environment? Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, thank you. I have, which will be it's in nature. It's out in the country. I'm in America, you might have guessed by my accent, but and I'm in Indiana, which globally is kind of in the Chicago sort of area, but I'm like 3 hours away from Chicago. But if you haven't heard of Indiana, it's kind of in the middle-ish part of America. But so we're out in the country, and the site that we're on actually has an energy vortex on the site, which if you're familiar with what a vortex is, it's like this opening of energy that's connected to the earth, and it's like a spiraling energy. And you can use, like in the last retreat that we had, we were using dowsing rods so that you could kind of see that effect of as you walk closer to the, while we were there, because my co-host is a shaman, and he's done a lot of work with the earth all over the country and Hawaii and things like that. But he's very tuned in to the energy grids of the planet. And we were able to open a second vortex on that site. And what was fascinating is that we were working together as a group. So everybody who was participating in this work, in this retreat, we were working together with sacred geometry and with the earth. And a second vortex opened up, and it was very magical. It was really, really beautiful. And, we all kind of had our own experience of how we felt that. But it was fascinating because the next morning happened in an evening during a full moon. And the next morning, one of the people who had been my contact, who lived on the site, because it was also, there's a small community there. And she had been my contact, but she'd just been in the background. I mean, the other participants didn't know who she was. She wasn't interacting with our group. And she hadn't really been physically present very much. A lot of my coordination with her had been over text. So we'd been very much left alone. And she wanted to thank everybody, you know, at breakfast, because, you know, this was last year. So still like a lot of things shut down for COVID. They'd had a lot of groups that canceled on them. So she was really, really grateful for people being there and helping to keep this place going. And so she was talking a little bit about that. And then she said, and you know what you guys have been doing here, and we've been supporting you in the background, and we thank you for, you know, your contribution. And I was like, that's really interesting. So I asked my co-host later, I'm like, did you talk to Dawn? Like, did you tell her what happened last night? And he's like, I haven't talked to her. And I'm like, I didn't tell her anything. Like, she just literally, they literally knew that the energy had changed in the place, and that we had been doing grid work there, which was really validating and fascinating, I thought. So we're excited to go back there.
I find that so fascinating, this inner work, and that at the same time connects with healing the outer world.
Yes.
We are in that in-between phase of changing human consciousness, I believe, where it first has to go very bad before we go into that new dimension. And I firmly believe that meditation definitely is one of the ways to go. But how do we get more people motivated to do this type of training?
That's a great question. And I love what you're saying about the inner work and the outer work and how they go together. And really, for many people, the whole journey is within. You know, the biggest contribution that people can make to the external is to keep working on themselves. So here in America, we've just had another tragedy. For example, this is just, you know, because this just happened yesterday, we had another massive shooting, which is just incredible. It just heartbreaking. And so there's a lot of emotion over here. And it's very easy to get up in that emotion because it's so heartbreaking, and to think, how do I change everybody else? How do I stop something like this happening by changing everybody else so that they don't want to do this, or so that they agree with me about gun control? Or, you know, that I've spent a lot of my life feeling that way and feeling like I need to keep having conversations to convince people. And, you know, that has a place. It's not like just shut down and don't talk to anybody and just let everybody, you know, whatever. But really, it is reconciling within ourselves. You know, it's amplifying our own light. It's sealing up our own field, and being that beacon of light. And when we are in judgment, when we are allowing ourselves to get caught up of separation, we still have work to do on ourselves. So if we're looking at the external and we're going, that's the problem. Yes, and
I agree totally. Yeah. Because that is really an expression of what's happening internally. The mental health crisis and the spiritual disconnect.
Absolutely. Those things go hand in hand. So, you know, this a big part, again, like I come at things very much from the energetic side. But that separation, that division, that isolation that we feel, whether it be us against them, my way, wrong way, right way, you know, all of that, we're feeling we're on one side and the bad people on the other. This is a big part of our problem collectively. And there are things that feed that the media, for example, much of the media is feeding that. It's aggravating these things within us. It's churning up this righteousness within us and making us feel like we are separate, and that there is, and this is, that whole division is it's very difficult to keep advancing internally and to keep evolving internally if you're still holding a lot of hatred and judgment toward others. So
Oh,
that
yes.
needs to be
Yeah.
reconciled within us. And meditation is huge for that. Meditation helps us come into our center, understand who we are, and that acceptance piece. We can work on that in meditation. It's complex. It's complex because we don't want to be complacent and be like, oh, all these, this tragic thing happened and I'm not affected by it. I don't find sadness in it. That's also not very realistic as a human. We of course extend a ton of compassion, but so it's a delicate line. That we have to feel within ourselves in terms of acceptance, unity, non-judgment, compassion, and even holding compassion to people who are have different views than what we have and are on a different side of a controversial topic.
Yes, I do think that a lot of this divisive narrative is being fed by mass media, which obviously feeds on toxic emotions. And it's very difficult for the other voices to come to the fore, the voices of light, of understanding, of tolerance.
Right. Absolutely. Yes.
And I don't think we should ignore that world out there. You just referred to that tragedy that just happened in the US. I do think we should be aware of that, feel empathy, and ask ourselves, why is this happening? And as you just said, not go into that judgmental mindset of those are responsible and
Right.
let's change it externally, forgetting the collective responsibility within.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Kara, it was great talking to you.
Oh, I've had so fun. Thank you so
I think
much.
you have such important messages there for everyone. One last message for people out there that you might have. Obviously, they can connect with you on your website, where you have information on your meditation courses, your retreats. What else would you like to tell our listeners?
Yeah, thank you. So you can find me on online, like you said, at karagoodwin.com. That's Kara with a K. And I do have a guided meditation that's free right on my home. So you just put your email in there and it'll get right to your 10-minute meditation. That can be a great place to start if you want to develop a meditation practice. You do feel overwhelmed by just sitting there, like we've been talking about, like, okay, just bring that peace. Guided meditation. So it's a meditation to really focus on bringing more light into your life. So as we're dealing with negative emotions and an emotional time like what we're in right now, that can be very, very soothing to kind of start to heal some of that trauma that we're all holding within us. And so that's a great place to start. And as far as just messages to leave as we're finishing up, it's one of the things that's coming up right now is just to really value where you are right now, because so often it can be really easy to feel like we have so far to go if we're especially if we're just starting to explore, or it's just been a few months or since we started opening ourselves up more and more to our spiritual nature. Every step along that path is important. It's not like we're just trying to get to the end and then we do it, oh, I finally did it. It's like, no, this is a process of awakening. It's little by little, and there are little victories as we continue to change, and so it's really just valuing and appreciating where we are to celebrate the beauty of that process.
I think that's a really nice closure, celebrating the beauty of the process. Thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you very much for hosting me.